So, let's talk about the Boxer Rebellion. It was this incredibly violent, chaotic conflict that basically pitted a secret society of Chinese nationalists against, well, the world's most powerful empires. But this was so much more than just a battle. It was actually America's first major military fight on the Asian mainland, and believe me, it would totally change the course of US foreign policy forever.
To really get a feel for what was at stake, I want you to picture this. It's the middle of the night, and you're on top of the 60-foot-high Tartar walls surrounding Beijing. A lone U.S. Marine, Private Dan Daly, is ordered to hold his post while his captain runs for reinforcements. For hours, under constant fire, Daly fends off wave after wave of attackers, single-handedly saving the American position from being completely overrun. His unbelievable bravery, which would earn him his first Medal of Honor, just perfectly captures the sheer desperation of the brutal 55-day siege that was about to unfold, a crisis that had really been simmering for decades.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at how this powder keg ignited by digging into the rebellion's roots. Then we'll relive that dramatic 55-day siege. We'll follow the massive 8-nation army that was put together to break the siege, and then we'll jump over to the American home front to see how this war was being sold to the public. And finally, we'll uncover its really surprising legacy, the birth of a totally new kind of American power on the world stage.
Right, so how in the world did it come to this? The Boxer Rebellion wasn't just some sudden explosion. No, it was more like the culmination of over 60 years of pressure. It was this perfect storm of foreign military defeats, economic chaos, devastating natural disasters, and just this deep national humiliation that it pushed Chinese society right to its breaking point. Now, what's so fascinating here is how all these different pressures just layered on top of each other. You've got these huge military defeats, like the Opium Wars, which literally forced China open. Then this shocking loss to Japan in 1895. That kicks off a scramble for concessions, where all these foreign powers start carving up the country. But then, on top of all that, you have these immense natural disasters. The Yellow River floods in '98, and then a terrible drought right after, which left millions of people in Shandong province with absolutely nothing. These displaced workers basically had two choices: go to the Christian missions for help, or join these secret societies. And when a British missionary was murdered in late 1899, it became terrifyingly clear which path a whole lot of people were choosing.
Now, while pretty much all the foreign powers were seen as invaders, they were playing different games. European nations were all about carving China into these exclusive spheres of influence, basically claiming economic control over huge regions. The United States, on the other hand, was kind of the new kid on the block in this global power play, and they went with something called the open door policy. The goal wasn't about grabbing territory, it was about unrestricted commerce. Washington just wanted American businesses to be able to trade freely all across China. But, to many Chinese people, this was a distinction without a difference. It was all just foreign exploitation.
And right into this volatile mix step the Boxers. Now, that name was just a Western nickname for a group called the Yi He Quan, or Righteous and Harmonious Fists. This was a people's movement, not some formal army. They practiced these martial arts rituals that they believed made them totally impervious to bullets. Yeah, you heard that right. And their message, it was simple, powerful, and dramatic. Support the Qing dynasty, exterminate the foreigners. Their first targets weren't even the foreigners themselves, but their Chinese converts, people they called rice Christians, who they resented for abandoning traditional ways for the resources offered by Western churches. The violence just kept escalating, from burning churches to brutal murders, putting every single foreigner on high alert.
By May of 1900, things were so critical that foreign powers sent troops to protect their diplomatic headquarters, their legations in Beijing. This small international force, which included U.S. Marines, basically walked directly into a trap, and that's what sparked the infamous 55-day siege.
For 55 grueling days, from June 20th to August 14th, this is how long nearly 4,000 foreigners and Chinese Christians were trapped inside Beijing's legation quarter. I mean, just imagine it. They were completely cut off from the world, surrounded by thousands of Boxers and, this is the critical part, soldiers from China's own imperial army. The government, under the Empress Dowager Cixi, had officially sided with the rebellion. The siege really began when the German minister, Baron von Ketteler, was assassinated right in the street by one of the Empress's own soldiers. Any hope of a peaceful way out just vanished. The defenders could now hear these chilling cries from outside their barricades. Shah! Shah! Kill! Kill! The fight for survival had begun. The desperation and just the sheer ingenuity of the defense were pretty remarkable.
The absolute key battleground was that Tartar wall overlooking the American legation. If it fell, the Chinese could fire directly down into the compound. Captain John T. Myers and his Marines held that line for days on end with almost no sleep. This is where Dan Daly made his famous stand. We also see heroes like Private Harry Fisher, whose real name was actually Franklin J. Phillips, a deserter who re-enlisted under an alias and was killed building a barricade. And then there's the International Gun. I love this. It's the perfect symbol of this coalition. They cobbled together parts from different nations, an English barrel and Italian carriage, to build a working cannon they nicknamed Old Betsy, which turned out to be crucial in holding off attacks.
Okay, so while the legations were just hanging on by a thread, the world was scrambling to respond. An unprecedented international military coalition, the Eight-Nation Alliance, was put together to fight its way from the coast all the way to Beijing to rescue the besieged diplomats. The first rescue attempt was an absolute disaster. A force of about 2,000 soldiers, including 112 Americans, set out from Tianjin by train, thinking they'd be in Beijing in a day. But the Boxers and Imperial troops tore up the tracks ahead of them, forcing these sailors to become railroad builders while under constant attack. It wasn't long before they were cut off, surrounded, and forced into this brutal retreat, suffering really heavy casualties. They were only saved from being wiped out when they stumbled upon the Xingui arsenal, which was full of food and weapons, and a courageous Chinese servant named Chow Yin-ho managed to sneak through enemy lines to get a message to Tianjin.
Before a second relief force could even think about marching on Beijing, the Allies first had to capture the walled city of Tianjin. The battle was incredibly bloody, pitting the international force against some 20,000 Chinese defenders. After a grueling fight, the city finally fell, but at a huge cost. 750 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing.
So, with Tianjin secured, the final relief force of nearly 19,000 troops began the perilous march to Beijing, battling intense heat and fierce Chinese resistance. On August 14th, at the very moment of victory, as they were breaching the city walls, Captain Henry J. Riley, commander of the U.S. artillery, was shot and killed. His friend, Marine Major Littleton Waller, later wrote this about the loss, and it just captures the personal cost of this war. A braver soldier, a truer friend, never breathed. He died at my side.
But while Marines and soldiers were fighting and dying in China, a very different kind of war was being waged back home. This was a war for public opinion, and it was fought in the pages of newspapers and magazines. You see, the story Americans saw was not one of complex geopolitics or competing economic interests. No, it was a simple, powerful narrative of good versus evil, of civilization versus barbarism. And it was carefully crafted to justify a foreign intervention that a lot of people were actually questioning.
Political cartoons like this one from Harper's Weekly were incredibly effective. I mean, just look at the imagery here. The Boxers are shown as these demonic, monstrous figures, not even human. They're attacking a helpless woman labeled civilization. And who's there to defend her? Uncle Sam and President McKinley, armed and resolute. The caption asks this rhetorical question. Is this imperialism? The answer, according to the cartoon, is a definitive no. This isn't conquest, it's a rescue mission, a noble duty to protect liberty and humanity.
And this narrative, it was supercharged by yellow journalism. In mid-July, newspapers all over the world ran these sensational headlines based on a single false report that the legations had fallen. They printed graphic, totally fabricated details of a gruesome 2-day slaughter of every man, woman, and child. The story was a complete lie, but it sparked global outrage and made military intervention seem not just necessary, but like an urgent moral imperative. So, after the relief of Beijing, the fighting was over, but the conflict's most enduring legacy was really just beginning. The aftermath would reveal this major shift in how the United States chose to project its power on the world stage. The first step was punishment. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 imposed some seriously harsh terms on China, and chief among them was a massive indemnity, basically a penalty payment. The total was 450 million taels of silver, an amount so huge it was more than the government's entire annual tax revenue. We're talking over $11 billion today. This table shows you how it was all divided up. Notice Russia and Germany took the biggest shares. The United States was allocated just over 7%. But it's what America did with its share that would change everything. This moment right here marks a critical pivot in American foreign policy. The rebellion itself, a clear exercise in hard power, using military force to get what you want. But in the aftermath, the U.S. pioneered a totally different strategy, what we now call soft power. achieving your goals not through force, but through cultural attraction and influence. And this slide just perfectly captures that shift. The United States decided to use its part of the indemnity money to create a scholarship program, funding Chinese students to study in American universities. The goal was brilliant in its subtlety. Instead of forcing China to comply, America would help educate its future leaders. These students would then return to China with American knowledge, American connections, and maybe American values. It was a long-term investment in influence. And this wasn't a one-off idea. The U.S. was using a similar program called the Pensionado program in the Philippines at the exact same time. It was a new tool for a new kind of empire. The Boxer Rebellion, born from this desperate attempt to kick out foreign influence, ultimately resulted in even deeper foreign control over China. It cost tens of thousands of lives and saddled the country with crippling debt. For America, it was a successful first test of coalition warfare and a catalyst for a new, more sophisticated foreign policy. But it leaves us with a question that really echoes through to today. When nations intervene, whether it's with guns or with scholarships, who truly pays the price? And what is the real cost of power?